Hello, I'm Simon Owens, and you're listening to The Business of Content, a podcast about how publishers create, distribute, and monetize their digital content. For this week's episode, we're talking about the wisdom of the crowds and how prediction markets can make better forecasts than most media pundits. Name just about any media beat, and you'll find plenty of people trying to predict the future. Political pundits argue over who will win the next election. Finance journalists report on economic forecast and claims from analysts over where a stock will be 6 months from now. Even entertainment bloggers will try to hash out which film, song, or TV show will win at the next awards ceremony. But in most cases, those predictions will be wrong. In fact, many studies have shown that a crowd of everyday people will, on average, make better predictions than the experts who work in that particular field. That's why a lot of attention has been paid lately to betting markets, which can provide real time odds for any particular outcome, ranging from a presidential election to winner the Best Picture Oscar. There's just one problem. Most states outlaw online gambling, meaning many of the most well known betting markets don't operate within the US. But a relatively new prediction market app called Futur gets around this hurdle by using fictional currency. I interviewed Tom Bennett, the founder of Futur, about how his app works and how its predictions matched up against those made by other famous forecasters like 538. Let's jump right into it. Hey, Tom, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So you're the founder and CEO of an app called Future, and that's spelled Futur. There are three U's in there. What's your elevator pitch for what Future is?
Sure. So Futur is how I like to pronounce it, but any pronunciation is okay. Futur is it's a prediction market. And for folks that aren't familiar with the term, prediction markets are basically like stock markets, except that you are, rather than purchasing equity in Apple and betting that it's going to go up. In the case of a prediction market, you are purchasing shares in the outcome of future events, and you're betting on the outcome of future events, sports, politics, really any event that has an objectively verifiable outcome. And the way that works specifically is outcomes in a given event have a price ranging from 0 to 1, and that price reflects the crowd's kind of estimate of the percentage chances of that outcome occurring. If you think it's a good buy, you can purchase that outcome. And if it occurs, for each share that you've purchased in that outcome, you'll win 1 unit of the currency. And I should point out that Futur is a prediction market, but it's a play money gamified prediction market. So we don't use real money and it's not actual gambling, but we use all of the basic prediction market principles.
And just like to summarize, like I don't know that much about gambling, but my understanding is like if I'm in Las Vegas and betting on a fight, if I'm the ratio of people betting who will win on each side affects how much money you get in the payoff. So if there were a lot more predicting that like this, boxer B will win than boxer A, then if I put money down on boxer A and A wins, and I get a much higher payout because there's a much more people that were putting money towards boxer B. Is that kind of like roughly how this works? Like you get rewarded a little, like how much you get rewarded is based on how many people are putting down money on each side?
Exactly. Yeah. So the longer the odds, the lower percentage chance of an outcome occurring, the better the payoff. So for instance, let's say, just to take an example, and I'm not a huge basketball fan, but a good example that I use is, Lakers versus Bulls. And if the Lakers are at 10 cents and the Bulls are at 90 cents, that means that the crowd estimates that the Lakers have a 10% chance of winning, and the Bulls 90%. If I think that the Lakers have a better than 10% chance of winning, I can purchase shares in that outcome. And if they do win, I'll make 10 times my money. I'll make 1 unit of the currency, $1, or in our case, we use a play money currency that we call the OOM. So I'll win 1 for every 10 cents that I've committed, or make 10 times my money, basically. And so the point of all of this is to aggregate the kind of wisdom of the crowd and to generate more accurate overall percentages and forecasts than you would otherwise have. And this is, it's been proven pretty consistently in a number of studies that kind of bringing together multiple perspectives through a mechanism like a prediction market will generate a more accurate forecast.
Yeah, and we'll get to that. We'll get to that in a second. But like, first, tell me a little bit. So you guys launched earlier this year. You launched earlier this year, right?
Correct. Yeah, we've gone through kind of a couple
Uh-huh.
phases. We were in kind of a private beta for a while, and we've sort of officially launched several months ago.
And what led up to the launch of the app? Like I was looking at your LinkedIn, you were working for like a company that specialized in stock footage, right?
Yeah, so my previous company is a company called Pond5, and it is also a market. So it's a market for stock footage and other digital media assets that go into media productions. So that it's a place where you can buy and sell, for instance, video clips. If you have a shot of, I think you live in Washington, D.C., so maybe you have some, shots of the Capitol building and so on that you could upload to Pond5. You set a price, and then if there's a filmmaker or somebody who's working on a television show that wants to license it, they can pay for it. You'll get 50% of the payment, and they'll have a license to use that shot. So this is kind of an open marketplace for digital media assets. We've got the largest selection of stock video on the web, and then things like music, sound effects, uh, photos, 3D models, and so on. So
And what's it like competing in the stock photography and video space? Like I get the sense that there are a lot of competitors out there. Like I'm a professional writer, and whenever I'm looking for photos for a client, I'll go to one of these stock photo websites and pay like $30 or something like that to use one of their photos. Like, and I used to work at like, major magazine, and we subscribe to several services. What are the key differentiating factors like that separate all these services from each other? Like how do you compete in that space?
yeah, in our case, we were sort of lucky to get in early. So we were kind of the first open marketplace for video specifically. My background kind of prior to that was as a video editor and video jack of all trades. So I did a lot of shooting and production and so on, and kind of recognized the opportunity back in 2005, 2004. I started thinking about it. 2005 began building it, brought in a co-founder who was kind of the technical talent, and the two of us were able to put it together and get the marketplace launched in 2006. So we were early, and it's like other kind of marketplaces, it's a network effect driven business. So the more content we were able to pull in, the more buyers we were able to attract, and the more buyers we had, the more content we were able to bring in. So kind of a virtuous cycle that gave us a bit of a head start and allowed us to survive in, to your point, a pretty competitive space.
And so, like, while the Gettys of the world were only using like professional photographers, you guys like had a marketplace where anybody could upload their photography and then start selling it on the market or something like that.
Yeah, so it's similar. I know that you were kind of a blogger back in the day. I listened to some of the previous episodes. Similar to that sort of democratization of publishing tools. When Pond5 launched, we were kind of in the midst of the digital video revolution, and the tools to produce, professional quality digital video were all of a sudden available to everybody, including me at the time. I was sort of able to survive because I was able to afford a copy of Final Cut Pro and edit video for a living. And there were a lot of other people that were kind of in that category. So exactly that. We were able to open it up to everybody who's producing professional quality content on both sides of the market. So people that were suppliers as well as buyers, but who hadn't been considered prior to that, quote unquote, professionals by the Gettys of the world.
And so, what led you to then now want to move on to this new thing and launch this new app?
So this is, forecasting in general is something that I find very interesting, and also just, as with Pond5, kind of marketplace dynamics, I find fascinating. And I actually initially had the idea in the early days of Pond5. I think it was 2007, in the build up to the elections in the U.S. There was a lot of talk of forecasting, as there tends to be during election years, and prediction markets came across my radar. And it was similar to Pond5. It was one of those things that seemed kind of inevitable, but didn't exist at the time. And of course, I was focused on Pond5 at that point. And in the interim, a lot's happened, but not too much has happened with prediction markets specifically, and partly that's because of legal issues and the players that were active back in the day. There was one called InTrade, which was probably the largest pure prediction market.
Yeah, and like Nate Silver, like I remember, like in 2012, Nate Silver would tweet out links to it all the
Yep.
time, but it was something that we as Americans couldn't really touch at all. So I had one friend who actually did bet on one of those prediction markets, and he had to like put a check into an envelope and like mail it over to the UK. Like there was no like efficient way for him to do it, and that was because like he legally I guess legally these betting markets really couldn't let you operate from the U.S.
Right, right. So UK has a strong tradition of people betting on pretty much everything, and that's actually historically the case in the U.S. as well. Back in the 19th century, people were there were betting markets around elections and so on. But it's illegal in the U.S., at least in most places in the U.S. And so that market's been sort of off limits, with the exception of Vegas, and now New Jersey and a few others are kind of getting in the game. There was a Supreme Court ruling relatively recently around sports betting that basically said that there's no longer a federal prohibition, and it's going to be state by state. So probably moving forward, there's going to be sort of progressive legalization in the U.S. And I think we'll see how it goes. In our case, again, it's play money. And that was a big part of the reasoning, in doing play money rather than real money, was that we could get people could get involved from anywhere, including the U.S. and other places that where gambling's illegal. And it also has the benefit of
But those just to interrupt, like those betting markets, like even though they didn't allow Americans to participate for the most part, they were still like pretty correct. Like I remember they were pretty like close to what 538 and a lot of those other prediction like forecasters were saying were going to happen in like the 2012 elections, for instance. So even like people playing afar who might not have been as close to the U.S. elections, those betting markets are pretty accurate.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, they've been demonstrated to be pretty consistently better than any given expert, for instance. And it's this kind of wisdom of the crowd concept, which is fascinating. It's a little bit like magic, but it actually works, and it's been demonstrated kind of over and over again.
And so you were fascinated with this. You decided. When did you launch? Like, who did you need to get together to launch this app? Like, did you build a team? Did you get like funding? Like, what did you need to do to bring all this together?
Yeah, so Pond Five was and still is quite successful. So it's growing quickly. Again, largest kind of collection of stock video on the web, and lots of audio and other assets. And so that was just scaling the company. And currently, I think Pond Five has something like 170 employees. Back in 2014, we did a financing and really kind of accelerated the business. In 2015, I shifted to the chairman position at Pond Five and was able to focus entirely on Futur. I was lucky enough to come across a team of folks based mostly in Brazil, which is actually where I live, and I've spent a good deal of time. I'm kind of pretty nomadic, but spent a good deal of time in Brazil. So we've got a team mostly based here of developers, designers, what we call editors, who are the folks that do the creation of the questions and curation of the questions in terms of resolving them when appropriate and so on. And so kind of put together the team, focused on building it out, and it launched a few months ago.
And so let's talk about how your app works. Like, what happens when I log in, and how do I start making predictions?
Yeah, so you can access via the app, which is our preference. We're kind of mobile first by orientation, but we have a fully functional web version as well. So futur.com, futur.com. Log in, with email or Facebook, and you can dive in and see all of the current kind of forecasts for events, ranging from international politics to what's going to happen on Game of Thrones to kind of everything in between. A lot of sports as well, a lot of kind of live game betting and so on. Jump in. You start the your career as a forecaster with 1,000 ooms, which again, that's the currency that we use, the play money currency. So everybody starts with 1,000 ooms, and you can go wild making your forecasts. And if you're good, you will accumulate more ooms, and you can make more forecasts.
Yeah, and so I played around with the app a little bit. Like it shows all these different predictions that people have made, and it tells you what the says 10% said it thinks this, and 90% thinks this going to happen. Like one of them is Trump
Yeah,
going to resign by the end of his term or something like that. You make your bet. It tells you there's a little sliding scale. It tells you how many shares you want to buy versus how much that'll cost, and then after you've purchased those shares, it tells you what they're worth now, what you can sell them for, because like you don't have to actually keep them the entire time all the way up
yeah,
until whether 2020 to see whether he resigns. Like you can as the markets change and more people, let's say all of a sudden it starts shifting the other way, and it looks like he is going to resign, you can actually sell those shares
exactly.
like
Yeah, so
right
it's
then
a
and
great
there,
point.
right?
You can switch your position anytime, get in, get out of the various markets. So if you're early in a longer term market, so something that might resolve 2 years down the road, and you get in at a good price, the price will go up as the market kind of comes around to your prescient viewpoint, and you can sell whenever you want, either to take your profit off the table, or to cut your losses if that's the scenario. So it's the idea is to have kind of an active, ongoing sort of indication of what the chances are in real time of any given event occurring.
So this is a media podcast, and so I can't help but think about how much of our media is predicated on predicting the future. You have political pundits, you have sports pundits, finance pundits. They're all trying to predict who's going to win this election or how this stock is going to be doing 6 months from now. Do you see services like yours being a part of that media ecosystem?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, we our hope is that we can kind of be a platform where you can go for objective, accurate, real-time forecasts for all sorts of events across all sorts of topics, from the most banal to the most existentially important, and get an actual objective view on what the likelihood of a given event is going to be. Beyond that, it's a great platform for kind of the social components. So if all of the various pundits that and talking heads that appear on TV making predictions, if they put some skin in the game, as they say, and registered their forecasts on an app like Futur, they could be held accountable. And my bet would be that a good number of them are not quite as accurate as they would have you think when they opine. And I don't think that's necessarily intentional. I think that's one of the sort of innate biases that we human beings have, is that we're prone to overestimating our assessments about predicting future events, and we're prone to forgetting all of the times that we were wrong about our predictions. So
Is it so? One thing that strikes me or makes me wonder is is it easy? I only really accessed it through the app itself. Is it easy to access the various predictions on the open web? Because I feel like if you do want journalists and pundits to start citing it, they need to be have a searchable platform that they can easily go to on the open web, that they can tweet a link to a
totally.
specific position and say hey, this prediction market Future is saying that this team has a 80% chance of winning in March Madness or whatever. How easy are you making it for them to discover it without having to download your app and becoming members and
So
stuff
very,
like that?
very easy. So that was a big focus, and it's a good observation. Typically, if it's an app-based platform, it might not be quite as accessible. In our case, we have a web version in currently both in English and Portuguese. Totally open. You don't need to register for an account or anything to access the forecast. So if you're a journalist and you're listening to this, I would encourage you to go to Futur and get a sense of what people think is in store for us in the future.
And can you talk about we just had a major election in the US. Can you talk about how accurate the predictions on your app have been compared to forecasts that you'll find on sites like 538?
Yeah, so we recently did an analysis. We've done kind of a few sort of assessments of how accurate collectively Futur was in predicting certain types of things. We did the Brazilian elections, which happened about a month ago. We did the Oscars, and most recently we did the U.S. midterm elections. And there is an abundance of forecasting talent focused on the U.S. election. So it was a really good opportunity for us to evaluate Future's performance versus some of the other folks that are out there. And so what we did is we compared Future with Nate Silver's 538 and also Predict It, which is a real money prediction market focused on U.S. politics. They were able to get an exemption from the CFTC. This is probably more detailed than you need, but they were able to get an exemption that allows them to run a real money prediction market in the U.S. Without violating the gambling laws. So we were interested in seeing whether we could, with a play money prediction market, match the performance of a real money prediction market, and then also whether we can match an expert using statistical analysis and polls data like 538. And the results were, we thought, very positive. So they validated our model of play money using reputation as an incentive rather than real money. The overall results, off the top of my head, but basically it was more or less a wash if you look at it, sort of the percentage of the accuracy rate in terms of the predictions were an exact match between the three platforms for the governorships and the Senate races. And then for the House, 538 had a very small lead. So I think they got one race correct, which we didn't. And so what was interesting is that all of the platforms were more or less on par in terms of the overall accuracy rate, but the errors were in different places. So a few of the races that we got wrong, the other guys got right, and conversely, some of the ones that they got wrong, we got right.
And were there individual predictions for every single individual race, or was it more like trying to predict what the actual number, it would be 53 Republicans versus 47 Democrats? Like was it a race by race predictions?
Yeah, so it was for the governorships and for the Senate. I believe it was every race that was active this cycle. And then for the House, it was we decided to just focus in on the most difficult to predict House races. So I think the total was, 43 races in the House. And so our accuracy rate was 89% on the gubernatorial races, 89% on the Senate, and then 77% for the House. But keeping in mind that we were focused just on the most competitive House races. And I should credit Lucas Maciel, who did the kind of analysis and write-up of this. He's one of our editors and works on marketing and communications as well.
And how close were those? So you said like 80, 90%, 75% on the House. Like how far off were those from like the other the other markets you were looking at, whether it was 538 or Cook Political or the other prediction markets?
Right. So let me give you the exact numbers here. So when it comes to the gubernatorial races versus 538, so we did separate comparisons because the overlap was not between the three platforms was not 100%. So we covered more races than Predict It did. They covered a few races that we didn't. 538 covered all of the races. So if you take the set of races that we covered and that same set of races covered by 538, 89% for both platforms, so exact match on the gubernatorial races. That was 32 out of the 36 races that were being contended. Senate, same thing, exact match of 89% in both cases, 24 out of 27 of the races. And for the House, we were 77% accurate. 538 was a little bit ahead with 81% accuracy. So they got 35 out of 43 races. We got 33 out of 43 races.
I guess like the cynic would say, like, of course, like maybe a lot of those people are using the 538 when they're making those bets. Like that, like of course they're drawing from the same information. So,
yeah.
Like of course they're going to kind of line up, and that doesn't really say much. What would you say to that?
So it is the case that the whole point of a prediction market is that it aggregates information from all sorts of sources, and a prominent public source like 538 is going to be a prime source of information for forecasters that are making their forecasts. But if you take the Brazilian elections, where we got, it was also we were very happy with the results there in terms of accuracy. In fact, I think it was a little bit better than we did for the U.S. Midterms. In the case of Brazil, there is polling data and so on, but it's much less reliable and thorough than in the U.S. And it doesn't have the special sauce of 538's statistical models, for instance. And nonetheless, we were able to get accurate, more accurate results than we did in the U.S. case. So I think the utility, the value of prediction market really gets highlighted when there's not a whole lot of publicly available sources, or there's big differences amongst them. So this is a very efficient way of bringing all that information together, kind of digesting it, and producing a probability estimate that, again, tends to be more accurate than any individual person participating in the forecasting.
How are you marketing the app? Like, what is your user acquisition strategy?
So we haven't done too much marketing to date. We're really focused on kind of refining the mechanics, and we do a little bit of Facebook advertising. We've done some work on YouTube, for instance, with some kind of influencers, but relatively little. And we're hoping to kind of continue to refine and tweak the platform, and we hope that it becomes viral eventually, and that folks will want to invite their friends so that they can show off their forecasting abilities.
And so it's mainly just kind of and like, do you think that because there's a gambling aspect, even though it's fake money, that kind of like that makes it kind of, and there's like that gamification, like, is that making it a little bit stickier than you think than your average app?
Yeah. So I mean, that's the hypothesis, and what we're seeing in the data is that people, the folks that are interested in this sort of thing tend to be very, very interested. So it's quite sticky. We get people coming back, almost daily, if not daily, to make a forecast, check in, and kind of see where their numbers are at. And there's lots of things that we plan to do to improve all of that. So right now, you can kind of, the social components are there and they work, but they're pretty lightweight at this point. So you can kind of comment on questions. You can follow other forecasters, get updates. Obviously, we've got a leaderboard to rank, the strongest forecasters. But we plan on improving that in the future, doing things like badges, more gamification. So if you were the, best forecaster in, soccer this month, you might get a badge on your profile and be able to show that off to your family and friends. So that sort of thing that we hope is going to make it even more sticky and viral.
And what kind of growth are you seeing? And like, what's the kind of critical mass you really need before like the wisdom of the crowd set in? Like, is it as few as like 100 people, 1,000 people? Like, where do you start seeing like the accuracy start to come into play?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's still a bit of an open question. I've heard various expert estimates of the numbers that might be needed to generate an accurate forecast, anywhere from a few, something like 5 or 6, to something like 100 on a given question. In the case of the midterms, we had on the order of 1,500 people participating, and the results we think were quite positive, and they were about what you would expect if you're predicting with a 90% degree of certainty a given event, and you get 90% of those events correct, then you are spot on. That's exactly what you would expect. The numbers that we're seeing are generating useful data already, and we expect that to get more accurate as we build out our user base.
What's your strategy from a revenue point of view?
Yeah, so there's a few kind of options on the table. We haven't locked down exactly how we're going to approach it. There's options ranging from kind of enterprise prediction market services, where a company might pay to have kind of a private prediction market on issues that are relevant to their business. There's kind of the real money wagering side of things, which is very complicated and legally precarious. So we're kind of evaluating all the different options, and we expect to have some announcements on that in 2019.
Do you think U.S. regulations are going to change that will allow actual betting, and like, would that change anything for your app?
Well, like I said, there was the Supreme Court case that was decided in favor of sports betting. My expectation would be over the next few years, kind of state by state, that probably it will be getting legalized, and that obviously opens up a really big gambling market for companies that are in the gambling business. In our case, that given that we're play money, it's not super relevant, and maybe it even benefits us if it's not legal, because more people will be making their forecasts using ooms rather than dollars. But we'll see where it goes. I think things are moving fast. Predicting the future of prediction markets is is a meta exercise that's probably more difficult than making your base layer predictions. But I expect in general that this is going to be get popularized. I think more and more people are going to become familiar with it. There's prediction market. The concept has been around for quite a while, arguably for centuries, and kind of in a more formal way. There's a guy named Robin Hanson who kind of really developed the idea and is seen as kind of a pioneer on prediction markets a couple decades ago. And there's been a lot of hope that prediction markets would come to be a useful resource and provide more accurate data and hold people accountable and so on and so forth. And for whatever reason, that hasn't happened. I hope that we can buck the trend and really kind of build out a popular platform that gets used much more broadly than prediction markets have been historically.
Okay, Tom. Well, those were all the questions I had. Where can people find you online?
Yeah, so Futur is on the web at futur.com, Futur. We're in the iOS and Android app stores, so I'd encourage you to download the app. We're on Twitter at Futur, and I personally am on Twitter at Tom Ben, TOMBENN. Or you can shoot me an email at tom@futur.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much. This was a lot of fun.
All right. Thanks, Simon. That was great.
Okay, that's all we have for you today. Be sure to subscribe to the Business of Content on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast. See you next week.